The northern Ural Mountains don't just hold secrets, they bury them under 1,000 miles of ice. In 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out on a journey they had planned for months. They were experts, disciplined, and prepared for anything. But something happened on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, something that turned a routine expedition into a haunting enigma that has baffled investigators for over 60 years. We are not just looking at a tragedy. We are looking at a moment where human logic failed and the mountain began to keep its own counsel. If you are watching this right now, I want to ask you something. How much of history do you think is actually true? Because what you are about to hear was never meant to reach you. These are the classified files, the buried evidence, and the forbidden stories that powerful forces spent decades trying to erase. If you are someone who refuses to accept the official story, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Dark History Files and join thousands of truth seekers uncovering what history tried to hide. Welcome back. This is the Dark History Files, and today we expose a truth that was never meant to be told. The northern Ural Mountains stretch across the horizon with a quiet confidence that feels older than memory itself. Long ridges rise through forests of dark spruce before giving way to open slopes, where snow settles for months beneath an endless sky. Rivers disappear beneath thick ice, while scattered stone fields interrupt the white landscape without warning. Far from villages or busy roads, these mountains offer little sign that people ever passed through them, leaving the land to shape its own story over countless generations. Standing within this landscape is less about seeing than slowly noticing. The wind rarely arrives in a single direction. It circles exposed ridges, slips through narrow valleys, and brushes across frozen ground with changing voices. Cold air carries almost no familiar scent, only the faint trace of pine, distant snow, and weathered rock. Each breath feels sharper than expected, while every sound travels farther than the eye can follow before disappearing into an immense wilderness that seems to absorb every echo. As daylight moves across the mountains, the terrain quietly changes its character. Gentle slopes reveal hidden hollows beneath drifting snow, while smooth surfaces become uneven fields shaped by weeks of restless weather. Clouds gather without ceremony, softening the outlines of distant peaks until land and sky begin to merge. Trails that appeared clear only moments before slowly lose their edges, inviting uncertainty into places that first seemed easy to understand. Nothing dramatic announces the transformation. It unfolds through countless small changes that steadily reshape every familiar landmark. Perhaps that is why these mountains leave such a lasting impression on those who study them today. The landscape offers no obvious warning, yet it asks for constant attention in ways that are difficult to explain. Distance feels different here, and confidence quietly fades beneath the weight of unfamiliar space. Long before the world learned the name Dyatlov Pass, these silent ridges had already been teaching the same quiet lesson. Nature does not conceal its secrets through mystery alone. Sometimes it simply waits until certainty begins to disappear. Maps often give the impression that every place has been carefully measured and fully understood. The northern Ural Mountains challenge that assumption. Across this broad wilderness, distances appear simple on paper, yet every kilometer asks far more from those who travel across it. Deep snow changes the pace of every step. Hidden streams interrupt natural routes. Ridges that seem close from one valley often require hours of difficult climbing before they can finally be reached. The landscape quietly resists easy progress without ever appearing openly hostile. For centuries, these mountains stood at the edge of different worlds. To the west lay the forests and settlements of European Russia. Beyond the eastern slopes stretched the immense reaches of Siberia. The range became more than a geographical boundary. It marked a gradual passage between landscapes, climates, and ways of life. Indigenous Mansi hunters knew these valleys through experience gathered over generations. They understood where rivers froze first, where animals crossed during winter, and which slopes demanded extra caution when weather shifted without warning. Their knowledge came from careful observation rather than conquest, treating the mountains as something to understand instead of something to overcome. Winter transforms this region with remarkable patience. Snow does not simply cover the ground. It reshapes it. Small streams disappear beneath frozen layers. Shallow depressions become invisible beneath fresh drifts. Rocks that once served as useful landmarks vanish until only smooth white surfaces remain. Wind continues the work long after snowfall ends, lifting loose crystals into the air and laying them down somewhere else. The result is a landscape that seems familiar one morning and quietly unfamiliar by evening. Travelers may believe they are following yesterday's path, while the mountain has already drawn an entirely different one. Light behaves strangely across these open slopes. During clear mornings, sunlight reflects from every direction, reducing shadows and flattening the land until judging distance becomes unexpectedly difficult. Later, heavy clouds soften the brightness into pale gray, removing sharp outlines from hills and ridges. As evening approaches, the horizon slowly dissolves into the snow itself. Sky and earth begin to share the same color, leaving only subtle differences in texture to separate one from the other. Under such conditions, the human eye searches constantly for reliable reference points, yet finds surprisingly few. None of these features appear extraordinary on their own. Snow belongs in winter mountains. Wind belongs on exposed ridges. Fading light is part of every northern evening. Yet together they create an environment where ordinary judgments become less dependable than people expect. Direction becomes a quiet calculation repeated with every step. Small decisions gather unseen consequences. The mountain never forces confusion upon those who enter it. Instead, it slowly invites uncertainty through countless ordinary details that seem harmless until they begin working together. Beneath the snow lies a foundation shaped over immense stretches of time. The northern Ural Mountains rank among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. Their sharp peaks have long since yielded to weather, leaving broad ridges, rounded summits, and scattered fields of broken stone. At first glance, the landscape appears gentle compared with younger mountain systems, yet its age has created a different kind of challenge. Wide open slopes offer little shelter from the wind, while exposed rock interrupts the snow in unexpected patterns that change with every season. The ground itself tells a story of constant adjustment. During warmer months, water works its way into tiny cracks within the stone. When winter returns, that moisture freezes and expands, slowly breaking solid rock into countless fragments. Year after year, this quiet process spreads loose stones across the hillsides. Snow later settles over these uneven surfaces, hiding what lies beneath. A traveler crossing what seems like smooth ground may suddenly step onto shifting rocks concealed beneath a thin frozen layer. The mountain changes through patient repetition rather than sudden violence. Weather here follows no simple rhythm. A calm morning can encourage confidence, only for stronger winds to arrive hours later without dramatic warning. Fine snow lifted from distant slopes drifts through the air even when fresh snowfall has ended. Visibility changes gradually instead of all at once. Faraway ridges become faint outlines before disappearing entirely behind moving curtains of ice crystals. These subtle transitions rarely command immediate attention, yet together they reshape the way people interpret the landscape around them. Familiar features slowly lose their certainty as conditions continue to evolve. Silence also behaves differently in this environment. It is not the complete absence of sound. Instead, it becomes a shifting collection of small natural voices. Wind brushes across frozen ridges with changing tones. Snow crystals slide gently across hard surfaces. Distant trees respond with occasional cracks as extreme cold tightens their trunks. Every sound feels isolated, separated by long stretches where nothing seems to happen. The mind begins to notice details that might pass unnoticed elsewhere, searching for patterns within an environment that offers very few. This quiet complexity gives the northern Urals an unusual character. Nothing appears designed to frighten those who enter. The mountains reveal no dramatic cliffs demanding immediate fear and no constant storms announcing obvious danger. Their influence is more gradual. Confidence slowly adjusts to unfamiliar conditions. Attention settles on smaller observations. Ordinary features begin carrying unexpected importance. Long before any famous expedition reached these remote slopes, the landscape had already perfected a subtle way of testing everyone who crossed it, asking not for strength alone, but for patience, awareness, and careful judgment. Long before modern maps assigned names to these ridges, people had already formed a relationship with the northern Ural wilderness. The Mansi, whose communities lived across this region for generations, traveled through forests and valleys with a familiarity that came from repeated experience rather than written records. Rivers served as natural guides, while seasonal migrations of animals revealed dependable routes through difficult terrain. Every journey added another quiet layer of understanding, allowing knowledge to pass from one generation to the next through memory and observation instead of permanent markings on paper. Among the Mansi, the landscape was never treated as an empty backdrop. Individual rivers, forests, and mountains carried their own identity within local tradition. Some places were associated with successful hunts, while others inspired greater caution because of harsh weather or challenging ground. These stories were not always warnings about hidden danger. Often they reflected respect for an environment that could reward careful judgment or punish unnecessary confidence. In such a setting, survival depended less on courage than on recognizing that nature followed its own patterns, regardless of human intentions. Winter travel demanded routines shaped by countless earlier journeys. Movement across deep snow required measured energy, since exhaustion arrived more quickly than many outsiders expected. Campsites were chosen with attention to wind, shelter, and access to fuel rather than convenience alone. Every decision carried practical value. A slight change in elevation could reduce exposure during the night. A nearby cluster of trees might provide firewood as well as protection from drifting snow. These habits were not dramatic acts of wilderness skill. They became ordinary practices repeated until they felt almost instinctive. Visitors arriving from distant cities often viewed the mountains through different expectations. Scientific expeditions, hikers, and survey teams relied upon maps, compasses, and carefully planned routes. Their equipment reflected impressive preparation, yet unfamiliar landscapes sometimes presented challenges beyond technical planning. Local experience and formal training each offered valuable knowledge, though they approached the same terrain from different directions. One relied upon generations of observation. The other trusted measurement, organization, and disciplined procedure. Neither perspective was complete by itself, because the mountain answered only to its own conditions. This meeting between human understanding and natural uncertainty gives the northern Urals much of their lasting fascination. Every traveler entered with knowledge gathered elsewhere, then quietly adapted to lessons offered by the landscape itself. Some discoveries came through success. Others emerged from unexpected difficulty. The mountain never explained which lesson would come first. It simply presented the same ridges, valleys, forests, and weather to every visitor, allowing each person to understand them in a slightly different way. That quiet exchange would become especially meaningful before one particular winter expedition changed history forever. As the winter of 1959 settled over the northern Ural Mountains, the landscape carried no visible sign that it was about to enter history. Snow gathered across the broad slopes as it had through countless earlier seasons. The wind traced familiar paths over exposed ridges, smoothing fresh drifts and uncovering weathered patches of stone. Rivers rested beneath thick ice, forests waited beneath heavy branches, and distant peaks faded into the pale horizon whenever clouds drifted across the sky. Everything belonged to an ordinary northern winter, one that appeared no different from many before it. Yet history often begins in places that seem completely ordinary. Famous events are rarely announced before they happen. Instead, they emerge from locations that have quietly existed for years without attracting wider attention. The Northern Urals were one such place. Few people outside the region had reason to think about these mountains. They were remote, difficult to reach, and absent from the daily lives of almost everyone. Their silence was not mysterious because something strange had happened there. It was simply the natural silence of distance, isolation, and an environment that asked for little attention from the outside world. Soon, a small group of experienced young hikers would set their course toward these remote slopes. They would arrive carrying carefully packed equipment, detailed plans, and confidence earned through earlier expeditions. Nothing about their preparations suggested recklessness. They understood winter travel, respected difficult terrain, and expected the mountain to demand discipline rather than fear. At that moment, the landscape knew nothing of the names they carried, just as it had known nothing of the many travelers who crossed these valleys before them. The meeting between people and place had not yet become a mystery. It was simply another journey beginning across familiar snow. Looking back from the present, it is tempting to search these mountains for hidden warnings or forgotten signs that pointed toward the future. The landscape offers no such certainty. It reveals only what existed at the time. Broad ridges shaped by ancient stone. Endless fields of snow rearranged by patient winds. Forests standing below the open slopes. Quiet valleys stretching toward the horizon. Before any question was asked, before any investigation began, before countless theories filled books and documentaries, there was only the mountain itself. To understand the mystery that followed, it is necessary to begin here, with the place that kept its silence long before anyone thought to listen. The mountains were the stage, indifferent and ancient, but the drama belonged to the 9 people who dared to cross them. To understand how they vanished, we must first understand who they were, and why their meticulous preparation is the very thing that makes their fate so difficult to comprehend. The 9 hikers came from different cities, different families, and different paths through life, yet they shared a remarkable sense of purpose. Most were students or recent graduates with strong interests in engineering, radio technology, and outdoor travel. Their backpacks reflected careful preparation rather than adventure for its own sake. Heavy clothing, durable skis, notebooks, cameras, cooking supplies, and repair tools filled every available space. Nothing suggested a careless journey. Every item carried into the mountains had already earned its place through practical experience. The group moved with habits shaped by many earlier expeditions. Mornings often began with the sound of stoves melting snow into drinking water while the smell of warm porridge drifted through the cold air. Boots were checked before each day's travel, straps tightened, and equipment adjusted with familiar routines that needed few words. Friendly conversations blended with quiet concentration as everyone prepared for another long stretch across winter terrain. Even in difficult conditions, there remained space for laughter, shared meals, and small moments that made distant mountains feel briefly welcoming. As the expedition continued, each day followed a rhythm that balanced discipline with flexibility. Camps were built before darkness settled across the snow, clothing was dried whenever possible, and journals were updated after evening meals. Cameras passed from hand to hand, capturing ordinary scenes that seemed worth remembering at the time. Someone joked while another adjusted a ski binding. One person gathered firewood while another studied the route ahead. These quiet exchanges revealed a group working together through countless small actions rather than dramatic displays of leadership or endurance. Looking through their surviving photographs today creates an unusual feeling. Faces appear relaxed, expressions open, and confidence grows naturally from shared experience instead of bold ambition. It becomes difficult to separate these ordinary young people from the mystery that would later surround their names. Before history remembered them as part of an unsolved case, they were friends planning another successful expedition. Their greatest story had not yet begun. At this point, they were simply living the careful routines that had carried them safely across many mountains before, trusting familiar habits to guide them once again. Experience shaped nearly every decision the group made before leaving home. This was not a collection of inexperienced travelers drawn toward danger by curiosity alone. Several members had already completed demanding winter expeditions that qualified them for the highest levels of Soviet hiking certification. They understood how quickly weather could change, how to ration food during long journeys, and how to organize camp after exhausting days on the trail. Their confidence grew from repeated success under difficult conditions, making careful preparation feel as natural as breathing. The expedition itself required weeks of planning before anyone clipped into a pair of skis. Routes were studied across detailed topographic maps. Distances were measured against available daylight. Food supplies were calculated with surprising precision, balancing weight against nutritional needs for many days in freezing temperatures. Clothing was chosen in layers that could adapt to changing weather, while emergency equipment received the same attention as everyday necessities. Every participant accepted responsibility not only for personal gear, but also for shared items that kept the entire team functioning together. Each backpack carried more than food and clothing. There were notebooks ready to record observations, cameras loaded with precious rolls of film, spare batteries protected from the cold, repair kits for damaged equipment, and simple medical supplies for expected injuries, such as blisters or minor cuts. Axes, cooking pots, ropes, ski poles, and canvas shelters all had practical purposes shaped by earlier expeditions. Nothing reflected luxury. Every object represented experience translated into preparation, showing how often small details determined comfort and safety during long winter journeys. Their routines also revealed an impressive level of cooperation. Stronger skiers naturally broke fresh trails through deeper snow before rotating with others to share the effort. Tasks around camp rarely required formal assignments because everyone understood what needed to be done. While one person collected firewood, another prepared food. Someone repaired worn equipment, while another checked maps for the following day's route. These ordinary acts built quiet trust between individuals who depended upon one another far beyond the conveniences of modern life. Reading their journals today offers an intimate glimpse into that trust. The entries rarely focus on hardship alone. Instead, they mention changing weather, amusing conversations, songs shared during rest stops, and the satisfaction of making steady progress across difficult country. The tone feels practical, occasionally playful, and remarkably human. These writings remind us that the expedition was not defined by fear before history gave it that meaning. It was a living experience filled with ordinary friendships, careful routines, and genuine enthusiasm for the wilderness they had chosen to explore together. One quality quietly connected every member of the expedition. They paid attention to details that many people would overlook. A loose binding was tightened before it became a problem. Damp gloves were dried near the evening fire before they stiffened with ice. Clothing was adjusted as temperatures shifted, reducing the risk of sweat freezing during long hours of travel. These habits were never dramatic, yet they reflected a mindset built around prevention rather than reaction. Good decisions were made long before difficult moments ever arrived. The photographs taken along the route reveal far more than smiling faces. They capture backpacks resting neatly in the snow, skis stacked with care, tents assembled with practiced efficiency, and companions waiting patiently while equipment was organized. No one appears rushed. Even during pauses along the trail, there is a quiet sense of order behind the relaxed expressions. These images feel almost ordinary, yet that ordinary quality has become one of their greatest strengths. They preserve a group functioning exactly as experienced winter travelers should. Their conversations also reflected curiosity beyond the journey itself. Several members were engineering students who naturally discussed technical problems, university life, and future careers while crossing the mountains. Others enjoyed singing familiar songs during rest periods or sharing stories that helped shorten long stretches of difficult skiing. Humor appeared often in journal entries and photographs, suggesting that laughter remained an important part of expedition life even when physical effort demanded patience. The wilderness challenged them, but it never erased their individuality or their sense of companionship. Every evening followed a pattern refined through experience. After reaching a suitable campsite, everyone settled into familiar responsibilities almost automatically. Snow was gathered and melted into water. Meals were prepared with simple ingredients that provided dependable energy. Damp clothing was aired whenever conditions allowed, and equipment received a careful inspection before darkness deepened. Once practical work was complete, notebooks often emerged from backpacks. Personal observations, route details, and small reflections found their way onto the pages, creating a quiet record of days that seemed routine while they were being lived. Looking back now, these ordinary moments carry unexpected weight. They remind us that history often remembers the final chapter while overlooking everything that came before it. The hikers were not constantly confronting danger. Most of their time was spent solving everyday problems with patience, cooperation, and skill. Their expedition was shaped by countless familiar routines that had succeeded many times before. That quiet normality is precisely what makes the story so compelling, because nothing within these daily patterns hints that the journey was approaching the moment the world would never forget. Leadership within the group followed a quiet rhythm rather than strict authority. Igor Dyatlov guided the expedition with calm organization, yet decisions often reflected discussion instead of command. Every member brought valuable experience, allowing responsibility to move naturally between individuals according to the needs of the day. Someone with stronger navigation skills might study the route across unfamiliar ground, while another with practical repair knowledge focused on maintaining equipment. This shared approach created a sense of confidence that rested upon cooperation instead of hierarchy. The pace of travel reflected that same balanced mindset. No one hurried simply to cover greater distance. The group understood that winter expeditions rewarded consistency far more than speed. Frequent pauses allowed backpacks to be adjusted, clothing to be checked, and small problems to be corrected before they grew larger. These brief moments also offered opportunities to observe weather conditions and compare the planned route with the landscape ahead. Progress became a series of thoughtful decisions linked together across many hours rather than a single determined push toward the destination. Meals served an important purpose beyond satisfying hunger. Shared food created regular moments when conversation naturally returned, helping everyone remain connected after long periods of quiet movement across open snow. Hot drinks brought welcome warmth to cold hands, while simple meals restored energy for the following stage of the journey. Around the camp stove, discussions shifted easily between practical matters and personal stories. Plans for future adventures mixed with memories from earlier expeditions, revealing a group that viewed outdoor travel not as an isolated challenge, but as a lasting part of their lives. Trust also revealed itself through countless unnoticed gestures. Equipment was shared whenever someone needed assistance. Heavy communal supplies were distributed fairly across different backpacks to reduce unnecessary strain. If one member paused to adjust clothing or repair a ski binding, others waited patiently without complaint. These actions required no special recognition because they had become ordinary expectations within the team. Cooperation had grown through repeated journeys together, creating quiet confidence that everyone would contribute whenever circumstances required. Perhaps this is the most important way to understand the expedition before the mystery begins. The hikers were not strangers brought together by chance, nor reckless adventurers chasing unnecessary danger. They formed a capable group built upon preparation, mutual respect, and practical experience earned across many demanding expeditions. Their routines reflected careful judgment rather than misplaced confidence. Every photograph, journal entry, and remembered conversation points toward the same conclusion. Before history transformed them into symbols of an unsolved mystery, they were simply 9 skilled companions moving steadily toward another winter destination they fully expected to reach. Before the expedition entered the most isolated stretches of the northern Urals, there was one quiet moment that now feels especially meaningful. One member of the original team, Yuri Yudin, developed severe pain caused by an existing medical condition. After careful consideration, he made the difficult decision to turn back before the route became more demanding. His companions helped reorganize the shared equipment, exchanged warm farewells, and watched him begin the journey home. At the time, it appeared to be an ordinary decision shaped by practical judgment rather than emotion. The remaining 9 continued forward with little reason to believe their plans had changed in any significant way. Their route still followed the same careful schedule. Their supplies remained sufficient for the days ahead. Weather presented challenges that experienced hikers expected during a winter expedition, but nothing suggested that ordinary preparation would soon meet extraordinary circumstances. Their journals and photographs continued to capture familiar routines, recording landscapes, conversations, and daily progress with the same steady attention that had marked the journey from the beginning. What survives today from those final days before the mystery is striking in its normality. Faces appear cheerful despite the cold. Packs remain carefully organized. Camps reflect practiced efficiency. There is no visible sign of fear, confusion, or growing uncertainty. The photographs reveal people completely engaged with the present moment, focused on skiing, setting camp, and sharing another demanding adventure with trusted companions. Looking at those images now creates a quiet contrast between what they understood at the time and what later generations already know. This contrast has shaped the lasting power of the Dyatlov story. Many historical mysteries begin with obvious warning signs or unusual events that invite immediate suspicion. Here, the opposite seems true. The opening chapters are filled with ordinary human experiences. Preparation, friendship, routine, and confidence appear again and again through journals, photographs, and remembered conversations. Nothing seems arranged for tragedy. Instead, the expedition unfolds with the familiar rhythm of many successful journeys that came before it. That ordinary beginning deserves careful attention because it changes the way the entire mystery is viewed. If these hikers had ignored basic safety or entered the mountains without experience, many later questions would feel easier to answer. The surviving evidence suggests something very different. They respected the wilderness, trusted one another, and followed habits refined through years of winter travel. As the expedition moved deeper into the northern Urals, they carried more than equipment and supplies. They carried confidence built upon experience. Only later would the mountain present a challenge unlike any they had faced before, and only then would an ordinary expedition begin its quiet transformation into one of history's most enduring mysteries. They were a team defined by rhythm, trust, and common sense. Yet, when searchers finally reached their last known coordinates, the scene didn't reflect a group of experts in control. It reflected a group interrupted in the most impossible way. We move now to the final campsite, the place where the silence of the wilderness became absolute. The final campsite stood high on the eastern slope of Kholat Syakhl, exposed to open weather with few natural barriers nearby. The large canvas tent was stretched directly across the snow and secured with skis, poles, and carefully placed supports. Inside, backpacks rested in orderly rows beside folded clothing, cooking equipment, notebooks, and food supplies prepared for another ordinary evening. Nothing about the arrangement suggested confusion. The camp reflected the quiet efficiency of people who had built many winter shelters before this one. Entering the tent in imagination reveals an atmosphere shaped by simple comforts rather than dramatic adventure. Damp will carry the faint smell of melted snow and long hours of travel. Metal cooking pots held traces of the evening meal, while heavy coats slowly released the cold gathered during the day's climb. Voices would have sounded softer beneath the canvas, protected from the stronger wind outside. In that enclosed space, warmth depended not on luxury, but on companionship, preparation, and shared routines repeated through many earlier expeditions. As evenings settled across the slope, activity gradually shifted from travel to rest. Boots were removed after another demanding day on skis. Extra clothing was arranged where it could dry as well as conditions allowed. Journals waited for fresh entries, cameras rested beside personal belongings, and tomorrow's route likely became part of an unhurried conversation. Small practical tasks quietly replaced the effort of crossing the mountain. The expedition seemed to be entering another familiar night, following the same steady rhythm that had guided the journey from the beginning. Looking at the campsite today creates a feeling that is difficult to separate from hindsight. Every ordinary object appears filled with unexpected significance because history preserved this single moment while countless similar evenings vanished without notice. The tent becomes more than temporary shelter. It feels like a photograph taken just before an unseen page turned forever. The greatest mystery is not hidden inside strange artifacts or mysterious symbols. It begins with the remarkable normality of a place where nothing seemed out of place until everything suddenly was. When search teams finally reached the abandoned campsite weeks later, they were not greeted by signs of a violent struggle. Instead, they found something far more unsettling. The tent remained standing beneath layers of wind-blown snow, leaning slightly against the slope, but still recognizable. Skis supported parts of the structure, while ropes and anchors held their positions with surprising consistency. From a distance, the camp appeared less like the scene of a disaster, and more like a place where its occupants might return at any moment after a short walk across the mountain. Stepping closer revealed details that quietly deepened the mystery. Blankets, spare clothing, food, and personal belongings remained inside the shelter. Cooking equipment had not been carefully packed away for departure. Boots were left where people normally remove them before settling in for the night. Some jackets and warm layers rested beside sleeping areas instead of being worn into the freezing darkness. Valuable cameras, notebooks, and other essential possessions also remained behind. These were not the choices expected from experienced hikers preparing for a planned journey into severe winter conditions. The arrangement of these objects suggested interruption rather than completion. Meals appeared unfinished. Everyday equipment waited exactly where it had last been used. Personal items belonging to different members rested side by side, creating the impression that individual routines had ended at nearly the same moment. Nothing inside the tent pointed toward careful packing or deliberate preparation for travel. Instead, the entire shelter resembled a paused evening, as though ordinary activities had been suspended before reaching their natural conclusion. One feature immediately drew the attention of investigators. The canvas contained long cuts that had been made from the inside, creating openings large enough for people to leave the shelter quickly. This detail became one of the defining pieces of evidence in the entire Dyatlov mystery. Why would experienced hikers damage their own protection against the deadly cold when the entrance remained available? That single question has echoed through decades of investigation because every possible answer seems to create another equally difficult problem. Yet even these damaged sections of canvas reveal something unexpected. The cuts themselves explain only how the tent was exited. They reveal nothing about why that decision was made. They do not identify fear, danger, confusion, or purpose. The tent preserves evidence of action, but not motivation. It quietly records the final ordinary moments before something changed, then falls completely silent. Everything that happened after those cuts belongs to a story written outside the shelter, while the campsite continues to hold its unanswered questions with remarkable restraint. The position of each object inside the tent has been examined for decades, not because the items themselves were unusual, but because ordinary belongings can quietly reveal the rhythm of everyday life. Sleeping places had been arranged with practical care, allowing each member enough space within the shared shelter. Backpacks rested where they could be reached without difficulty. Food supplies remained grouped together, and personal equipment stayed close to its owner. The organization reflected familiar habits developed through earlier expeditions, suggesting that the group had settled into another routine evening rather than preparing for immediate movement. Clothing tells a similarly thoughtful story. Heavy winter garments were not scattered carelessly across the shelter. Many items had been removed in the normal way people prepare for rest after hours of physical effort. Some members had already taken off boots, while extra layers lay nearby within easy reach. Gloves, hats, and warm clothing remained inside instead of accompanying their owners into the freezing night. These quiet details matter because experienced winter hikers understood better than most people how quickly exposure could become dangerous. Their usual habits emphasize staying warm whenever possible. Food also offers subtle clues. The remains of the evening meal suggest that dinner had already been prepared or was nearing completion before events changed direction. Cooking equipment remained where it had served its purpose. Simple provisions that would have been needed for the following morning were untouched. Nothing indicates a carefully planned departure from camp before sunrise. If the group expected to continue their journey the next day, the tent already contained everything required for another ordinary morning. The campsite feels prepared for tomorrow, not abandoned during the present. Among the most personal discoveries were the notebooks and cameras left behind. These objects carried far more than practical value. They preserved memories, observations, route details, and photographs collected throughout the expedition. Earlier images captured laughter, teamwork, changing landscapes, and the satisfaction of steady progress across difficult terrain. The journals reflected similar patterns, recording practical notes alongside small moments of humor and friendship. Together, they offered investigators something deeply human. Instead of anonymous victims, they revealed individuals whose lives extended well beyond the mystery that would later define them. When all these ordinary possessions are considered together, the campsite becomes less like a crime scene and more like a paused evening frozen in time. Every blanket, cooking pot, notebook, and pair of boots quietly points toward the same conclusion. The hikers expected to remain inside that shelter. Their belongings reflect continuity rather than departure. Whatever interrupted that expectation arrived after the routines of camp had already begun, leaving behind one of history's most remarkable collections of everyday evidence. Investigators quickly realized that the campsite offered something unusual beyond the damaged tent itself. The snow surrounding the shelter preserved a sequence of footprints leading away from the slope. Rather than revealing a chaotic stampede, many of the tracks appeared measured and recognizable, suggesting that at least part of the group moved across the snow on foot instead of running wildly. Some prints showed bare feet, others indicated socks, and a few reflected simple footwear. Together, they formed a quiet trail descending toward the distant tree line, leaving behind questions that have never been fully answered. The distance between the campsite and the forest also deserves careful attention. From the tent, the nearest substantial trees stood more than a kilometer away across an exposed hillside. In daylight, the route would have been visible, though physically demanding. During a winter night, with freezing temperatures and uncertain visibility, the journey became far more difficult. Every step carried the hikers farther from their shelter, their warm clothing, and nearly all of the equipment that had supported them throughout the expedition. The decision to continue downhill therefore appears as significant as the decision to leave the tent itself. The condition of the campsite adds another layer to this quiet puzzle. Search teams found no evidence that the tent had been swept away by a massive avalanche or crushed beneath overwhelming forces. Although snow had accumulated over time, much of the structure remained standing, and many belongings stayed in recognizable positions. The surrounding slope also lacked the broad pattern of destruction that many people instinctively associate with catastrophic snow movement. These observations have fueled decades of debate because they challenge explanations that initially seemed straightforward while never completely ruling them out. Every piece of evidence discovered around the tent behaves in a similar way. It offers information while refusing to provide a complete explanation. The footprints describe movement, but not intention. The abandoned clothing reveals interrupted routines, but not the reason behind them. The damaged canvas records an action without identifying its cause. Each clue stands firmly on its own, yet none comfortably joins the others into a single unquestioned narrative. Instead of forming one clear picture, they create several incomplete ones that overlap without fully connecting. This careful balance between certainty and uncertainty gives the campsite its enduring power. The evidence is remarkably real. It can be measured, photographed, and studied. yet its meaning remains surprisingly difficult to fix in place. Every ordinary detail seems capable of supporting more than one interpretation. As a result, the final camp is remembered not because it contained impossible mysteries, but because it preserved ordinary evidence that continues to resist an ordinary explanation, even after decades of careful examination. As investigators completed their examination of the campsite, one quiet realization gradually emerged. The tent did not tell the entire story. It marked the place where the known sequence of ordinary events ended, but it revealed almost nothing about what followed. Every sleeping space, cooking pot, notebook, and piece of clothing belonged to a familiar evening routine. The damaged canvas suggested a sudden decision, yet the shelter itself remained fixed in time, preserving only the final moments before the mystery moved beyond its walls. Attention naturally shifted toward the open slope below. The footprints leading away from the tent became the only visible connection between the campsite and whatever happened next. Each impression in the snow represented a choice already made, carrying the hikers farther from the protection they had built with such care. There were no written explanations waiting beside those tracks, no recorded conversations, and no surviving witness to describe the reasoning behind that remarkable journey into the darkness. The mountain accepted their footsteps while keeping their thoughts entirely to itself. This transition from shelter to wilderness changes the emotional center of the Dyatlov mystery. Inside the tent, investigators found recognizable routines and practical organization. Outside, they encountered a landscape where certainty became increasingly difficult to recover. The distance between those two places measured little more than a walk across snow, yet it separated ordinary human experience from one of history's most enduring unanswered questions. The mystery did not begin with dramatic discoveries in the forest. It began with the quiet moment when familiar routines ended and unexplained actions took their place. Over the decades, researchers have returned to the campsite again and again, hoping that a previously overlooked detail might finally connect every fragment of evidence. Measurements have been reviewed, photographs enlarged, weather records examined, and personal belongings studied with remarkable patience. Despite those efforts, the tent continues to offer the same restrained testimony it offered to the first search teams. It confirms what was present, records what was left behind, and quietly refuses to explain why the ordinary rhythm of that evening was broken. Perhaps that is why the final camp continues to hold such a powerful place in history. It reminds us that great mysteries do not always begin with extraordinary discoveries. Sometimes they begin with familiar objects resting exactly where they should be, waiting for owners who never returned. The tent stands as the last complete scene before the story fragments into scattered clues across the frozen mountainside. To understand everything that followed, we must now leave the shelter behind and follow the silent trail leading into the darkness below. The tent stood as a monument to a night that never ended. But the mystery doesn't stay within those canvas walls. Beyond the slope, into the tree line and the deep, unforgiving cold, the trail continues, and it leads to discoveries that defy every conventional explanation. We have only scratched the surface of the mountain's secrets. The journey into the darkness continues, and the next pieces of this puzzle will be revealed in just 48 hours.